whatever it'll take those particles out, and if there's anything left after that, because sometimes I put bentonite in, and overnight it's crystal clear. And sometimes I put it in and it looks like I haven't done anything. So if I do bentonite and it doesn't do anything within about a week, then I'll hit it with sparkaloid and give that another week. And I have only so far had one wine that did not respond to the 1-2 punch, and that was my banana wine, and I think it's going to be cloudy until the day I die. The other thing you can do is cold crash. Now, we mentioned that the yeast will settle out to the bottom once they become less active. Well, something we didn't talk about much during primary is the temperature. You want to control your temperature. You don't want the yeast to get too hot, but you don't want them to get too cold either, because the warmer it is, the faster they will work, but sometimes they go too fast and will produce off flavors. Right. And that's going to vary a lot depending on the yeast. But if it's too cold, they become deactive. They become less and less active, and your fermentation will slow down.
Each yeast will come with, when you look at the package for each yeast, or the paperwork that comes with it, it's probably going to tell you an optimal temperature range for it. Some are hotter, some are cold. Yeah.
Exactly. From what I can remember, D47 does not do at all well when it's warm. If you don't have temperature control and you're trying to make mead in the summer and you don't have AC, I think for the Lalvins, K1V1116 is the one that doesn't care about temperature if it's high. But we'll talk about those when we have a yeast. Yeah, 1388 doesn't care either?
Doesn't really care, no.
Okay, perfect.
I've had it go up to 80 and it's been fine.
Okay, that's good to know too. Yeah, well, we'll talk about, we're going to be having some discussions about yeast at some point as well, and we'll talk about specifics on yeast, but one of the other things you can do to get your mead to clear up is called cold crashing, where you take your entire batch and put it in the refrigerator. I have never done this in large scale because I cannot fit a carboy into my refrigerator, and my shelves in my fridge are not even big enough to put a 1-gallon carboy in. So I have not done much.
I haven't. It's a miracle.
Mm-hmm.
I have enough room to put a 5-gallon carboy in there, and if you've got a stubborn mead, it just cold crashing in 3 days, 4 days, sometimes overnight. But mostly in there after a week, that whole thing is just, everything just went down. I don't use bentonite or what was the other one that used Sparkaloid?
Sparkaloid.
I don't use either one of those, actually. My finding of choice is Super Clear. And it's a 2-part. I believe it's isinglass. Really, it's what Guinness famously stopped using because they went vegan.
Right. I think it's fish based, isn't it?
It's a fish, which sounds gross, but it adds absolutely no flavor to anything. But it is Super Clear. If you have a really stubborn mead, will pretty much. I have yet to meet the mead it can't clear. I bet you that banana mead won't stand up to it.
I have used Kieselsohl and isinglass, the 1-2 pack that comes with a wine kit. I've used that in the banana, and it's still cloudy.
Oh wow! So then forget it. Yeah, it'll stay cloudy.
It'll be clouded till the day I die. I've given up on it. And fortunately, I don't like bananas anyway, so I wasn't going to drink the damn stuff. But anyway.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So yeah, the time that I have used cold crashing is in small bits, and what I do is I'll use a sanitized mason jar to collect the dregs out of a batch from primary or secondary when I've been racking. The bits that you've stirred up, I'll take that and put that in the fridge overnight, and then I'll just pour off the clear stuff back into the carboy in the morning. So, and I know exactly how fast it works, I just don't have the capacity to put a whole carboy in.
Yeah.
The other thing you can think about is filtering. I do own a wine filter. I don't use it very often because mine's a pain in the arse to use. It leaks a lot. The filter media is expensive, and it it's a bitch and a half to try to get it primed. So I don't filter very often. You swear by filtering, don't you?
I do. I have 3 different. I have a big professional filter. But the one I'm using the most is the little. I think it's $30 or $40 on Amazon. I want to say.
Is it Bonvino?
Bonvino. That's the one. Bonvino. It's really easy to use. One filter medium will filter a 5-gallon carboy and polish it up real nice. That's the one I have. I find it really hard to get the thing primed. It doesn't suck water up into it. Oh, really?
So,
I have no problem at all. Huh. Yeah. But I put the
I heard him the whole time.
Did you? Yeah, he went gone on this end, so...
Maybe you went gone.
That's a possibility. That's a possibility. All right, so I'm sorry. Go ahead, Manny.
Well, the thing about filtering is it's not really an option for cloudy mead. Filtering it's really important to know that it's you're filtering a mead that you think that you don't need to filter because it's crystal clear. But it does make a big difference, and what it does is polish the mead. It'll take the little particulates that you can't see and
I still hear you.
Yeah, okay. I don't know. I'm hoping that it's not doing that on the recording because, I mean, if I'm not hearing it on my end, I'm assuming that it's not hearing it on the recording. So I'm gonna go watch the console here and see.
Okay.
You guys.
Well, what I found, polishing is exactly the correct word for describing what a wine filter does to a batch you think is already good. Because while I was doing the one batch that I bought the filter for, which there's a story, I'll tell you about the fruit flies later. I did a couple of other batches, and yeah, polished it brightens it up. It really, really makes it beautiful. Right. But I found that for me, especially because at the time I was doing predominantly 1-gallon batches, it really wasn't worth it. Because of the amount I lost just in transfer.
Yeah, especially if you're using one of those big, pro filters, it doesn't make any sense because
I've got the little Bonvino jet as well.
Okay. So you just don't like it.
I don't like it. I don't like the auto siphon I got either. The auto bottle filler that I got either. So I could just be a stick in the mud. It might be me. It might not be the machine at all.
But filtering is also not a substitute for stabilization, which I think you're going to talk about next, right?
Yeah, we are going to have a full bit on the hows and whys of stabilization, but the hard and fast rule I go by is if there's any sugar left in my must at all, I won't bottle it unless it's either been stabilized or been in the carboy for a year or two. I assume that after a year or two, if it was going to continue fermenting, it would have. And so far, so good, but I would not recommend anybody else do that because yeast can still pop up after years. Mm-hmm. I just assume that, if they're dead after if they're done after 2 years, they're done. And so far that has worked well for me. I wouldn't stake my life on it though. I'm always careful when I open a bottle. But the safest way to do it is with a 1-2 punch of potassium metabisulfite and potassium sorbate. If you use just the potassium sorbate alone, then it's quite possible you may have a particular bacteria in your must that is completely harmless to you, but will cause it will eat the potassium sorbate and produce geraniol, which, if you can imagine the smell of a geranium in your mead, and there's nothing you can do to get that out again afterwards. It's not pretty. I've never had it done with a mead, but I know what the smell is because I've had. There's a couple of things in my house that will do that if I leave them sitting around long enough. They smell like geranium, and it's really, really gross, and you really, really don't want that. That will ruin a batch of wine. So if you're going to stabilize it, you need to use your sulfates and your sorbate.
Right.
And the easiest way to use sulfites is a Campden tablet, 1 tablet per gallon. There are calculations based on your pH of exactly how much you need, and you can use test kits to make sure you've got enough. But in general, just the glossing over the details bit, 1 Campden tablet per gallon, and I think the potassium sorbate's a half a teaspoon per gallon. But again, when you buy the stuff, it will say on the package how much you need to use. Just follow the directions. That's the easiest way of making sure that you will not have a bottle bomb. And Manny was talking about having meat explosions hit the ceiling. I'm one of them, because the very first batch that I ever made in my life was wild grape wine, and I thought it was done. And I didn't realize that if I added sugar to it when I thought it was done, that the yeast would keep eating it and create more carbon dioxide. So I made the wine and I tasted it, and it wasn't sweet enough for me, so I added some sugar and I put the cork on.
Boom!
Yeah, purple ceiling. Wasn't much that actually reached the ceiling, but it did make a big mess.
Well, luckily that's all it did, right?
Yeah, exactly. I was using, I think, a Moniac bottle, and with one of the corks that's supposed to come out, so it wasn't like a fully corked bottle. But, in order to bottle safely, you should really stabilize your mead unless it is completely dry. That is the bottom line. Ultimately safe. If there's no sugar left in it, yeah, you can bottle it. But don't forget, you're never really going to know, because the amount of alcohol in your mead is going to cause your specific gravity to go below 1.00. I've had, I think 0.980 is the lowest specific gravity I have seen. That means anything above that still could possibly have some sugar in it, which could kick up at any moment. So
now that's a dry mead if I ever heard one.
Yeah, it really was. But the thing is, it was also a very potent mead, so the more alcohol you've got in it, the lower your specific gravity is going to be, because the specific gravity of alcohol is lower than that of water.
Correct.
So your alcohol is actually going to interfere with how much sugar you think you have according to your specific gravity. But that's a topic for another discussion. Now, people have been asking about aging. Don't assume you need to, because if you have a well-managed fermentation with properly managed temperature, like the bomb, you can drink that after a month. And a Joe's Ancient Orange, those are pretty... Bread yeast is pretty honest about when it's done. 2 months later, it says it's done. Usually it's done. But then again, there are certain extenuating circumstances that can cause you to want to age a mead for a long time. In fact, I've got one that's been in a carboy for over 10 years now. Because I made the mistake of using high bush cranberries, which are so bloody bitter that it smells fantastic, but when I first made it, it was, spit. Sip, spit. Wow. It took about 5 years before I could swallow it, and the last time I tested it, it was actually starting to be palatable. And I think in another couple of years, enough tannins will have dropped out of that in order to make it so that I will actually enjoy drinking it. It should eventually taste as good as it smells, because it still smells fantastic. But again, don't assume you'll need to age, but be prepared in case you do. If you have lousy temperature control over your mead, there's quite a possibility that you're going to make some fusel alcohols, and those can take a while to round out. That's what makes alcohol taste hot. And apparently reportedly also gives you the wicked hangovers.